Welcome to Clubhouse, with a look at the history of Bandai's real robot lines from the 1980s. Now specifically, we're looking at Bandai's partnership with Sunrise as they scramble to find the next big thing after Gundam became an unexpected smash hit. In fact, Bandai and Sunrise are still trying that up to this day with the upcoming Kyokai Senki and the big batch of models they just announced. Yeah, they're still looking for the second Gundam because, what's better than one series that basically accounts for all of your model sales? Why, two of course. So for our look back, we're going to be borrowing a few Twitter posts from Tom Oji-san, or Uncle Tom. Yeah, let's not think too much about that name. Anyway, Tom Oji-san recently posted a couple of pamphlets from Bandai back in the 80s, which happens to cover the 6 major real robot animation works between Sunrise and Bandai, which is what inspired me to do this video. But first, a quick bit of background. Sunrise has actually been a part of Bandai ever since 1994, but in the 80s they were very much two separate companies. The story of Sunrise, Gundam, and Bandai is long and interesting, involving a first broadcast run with such low ratings that it had to be cut short, a meddling toy maker that stuck their hands into everything, and then Bandai agreeing to take a chance in sponsoring a failed IP, but that's all for another day. What we do know is Sunrise and Bandai working together on the first Gundam ended up massively profitable for both companies, becoming what is commonly known as the Gundam boom. It was so massive that on one occasion, a new release even led to an escalator accident with injuries. And before long, Bandai ran out of mobile suits to make into new models. Not only had Gundam completed its second TV run, but all 3 compilation movies had already come out, which by the way, all 3 of them are available on Netflix, so go have a look. So this is where we are in the timeline, where Bandai and Sunrise are scratching their heads and thinking about what to do after Gundam. Now at that time, there wasn't even the proper concept of what a real robot was yet. In case you didn't know, a real robot is a derivative counterpart to the super robot, which we best know from Go Nagai's works such as Mazinger Z and Getter Robo. So super robots have elements of super science that, they basically have a bare bones set of scientific rules and logic, but all of that is very flexible, and a robot can routinely fly or shoot massive beams or split entire planets, or really they can do anything as long as the plot demands it and it looks cool. Now, Mobile Suit Gundam was the first massively successful work to give us the archetype of a real robot, where a robot animation must adhere to the science inside of its world along with all the limitations, and it can't just fire a bigger beam because the pilot shouts louder. And remember that at our point in time, there were no other real robot works to go on other than Gundam, so the obvious thing to do, other than to do a sequel to Gundam, was to make more of whatever the heck Gundam was, so Sunrise and Bandai got to work right away. And I know some of you guys are jumping out of your seats saying Space Runaway Ideon, and yes, that is a real robot work, but the models were made by Aoshima and not Bandai. Or maybe some of you shouted Armor Troopers Vottom, and you'd be right as well, but those models were made by Takara, who are now Takara Tomy. So specifically, Bandai's first big post-Gundam project was this. Combat Mecha Xabungle, which lots of people laugh at for looking really stupid, and there's no second half to that sentence. Looking at Tom Oji-san's first flyer here, if you've never seen them before, you'll probably be quite shocked at how incoherent the design language is. Or in simple terms, it didn't look like Sunrise knew what they wanted to do, because they didn't. They were working in a genre they invented, but it's also one that they didn't fully understand themselves yet. To give you some idea, because Gundam wasn't made by people who knew what a real robot was, they actually made a robot show without all the super stuff. I mean, Zaku's. You love them, right? But the name Zaku is just a stupid wordplay on the word Zako, which means small fry or worthless grunt. All the Zeon suits actually have nonsensical names that were very common to enemies from super robot animations. Here, let me explain this with the use of super invincible robot Trider G7. So here we have a bunch of names for their bad guys, and I think you get what I mean. And so we have this happy bunch here, like this truck with legs, which is actually quite cool and I actually really want one. And this guy here with barely any arm, and this guy here with way too much. There's also this mess in the corner here which looks like it was drawn by a toddler. But designs aside, Bandai actually had some good ideas for this line. No, really, I'm being serious. Bandai's angle for selling this line was to convey the real part of real robots, with details that remind us of real-world machinery. And if you think about it, that's a really sensible idea. I mean, check out the truck robo. Doesn't it look like something that came from our own technology? And here's something else Bandai did. So here I have the 1144 Xabungle in the flesh. Now the 1144 kits didn't have all the details of the 1100 kits like those ladders and all that stuff for human access, but they do have this. Do you see it? If you don't, that means this innovation has become so much the default it's now invisible to all of us. The panel lines here is the new thing. I mean, it's meant to make robots more like actual machinery. Yeah, I'm being absolutely serious. Let's bring in a Gundam kit to compare the two and this will help you see the difference. Yeah, the old Gundam kits had no panel lines because it wasn't a thing yet for robots. Someone had to make that leap to think of bringing them over from planes and ship models. So yeah, the Xabungle line may look pretty stupid, and it still looks like a super robot for some reason, but there's some of their DNA that's still in every single Gundam kit that you can buy today. So here's a third pamphlet from Tomoji-san showing a cutaway diagram of the Xabungle, and this is also something from Super Robot Animations that always had this kind of drawing, even if most of the mechanical details inside is just random nonsense, but the Xabungle gets one too, and it's actually not a bad drawing. The next bit is all story content, and here's a close-up of it if you want to read any of it. And here, other than the list of specs, we get the same lineup of kits. And I've always believed that the Xabungle looked so out of place because they wanted something that looked more in line with traditional and familiar super robots at the time, so that's why it looks like a super robot while everything else looks like machinery. And I want to take a second to talk about this logo right here. This logo, which is at the front of all the boxes, isn't actually the one for the animation. This is the full logo. So what's the big deal, right? Well, you see, Bandai had another hard rule for this line here, which is to not have the animation logo in any prominent spot on the package. Why? Because they didn't want the line to be animation accurate. I know that sounds crazy, but Bandai wanted the freedom to reinterpret and add details to the designs, and once you know that, you can kinda see that, right? So even though they look kind of funny, we can appreciate them a little better for being Bandai's first step in thinking about the role of model kits beyond just being a peripheral and derivative product of an animation. And as a footnote, Bandai also expanded their use of polycaps into the 1100 Xabungle kits. All of them had polycap joints, when previously only the 160 Gundam kits had them. So we've made some advancements already at this point. And eventually, Xabungle came to an end, and that Bandai time slot still needed to be filled, and products needed to be made, so Sunrise's next work was... Alright, cut it out, we're gonna get copyright striked. It's the isekai real robot work Aura Battler Dunbine, which a whole lot more people know than Xabungle. Tomoji-san's pamphlet this time seemed to be from the later part of the series where they've traveled away from Baiston Well and back into Japan. Now, I want to talk about this background here, and how the perspective is all wrong and it looks really badly made. The Xabungle ads weren't like this, so what gives? You see, Bandai hated this change from a fantasy world of Baiston Well into the boring modern Japan, and you know what, Sunrise didn't like it either. So there was a good amount of spite going on here in the ad's layout. Clover, Sunrise's original sponsor for Gundam, is the one who demanded the change, among many other things they demanded. Again, it's a story for another day. So we end up with this funny page here where the designer just passively aggressively pasted the buildings right here in the corner, and all the bosses at Bandai and all the bosses at Sunrise said, yeah, that looks about right. I mean, seriously, we wouldn't be looking at this right here if not both Bandai and Sunrise absolutely hated the idea and they wanted to show everyone that they hated this idea. Oh, and yeah, all the Dunbine kits are here too. I mean, I really want that ship. And in case you think I'm nuts, check out these next pages. The World of Dunbine, open bracket, Baiston Well, close bracket. And everything they show here properly sells the fantasy setting that they started out with. But the show was still airing at the time, so that's why this ad had to stick to that stupid real world setting because that's what was happening in the animation, and they did it very begrudgingly. I mean, I bet you didn't think an ad would have this much to tell us, right? Okay, so let's look at some actual kits again here with the Bastole and the Drumlo. The innovation this time is this matte surface that looks almost acid washed to look a bit more like the texture on an insect's carapace. And the Drumlo here shows us these soft chords that they use for the biomechanical details that you see in the joints. Of course, insect-like designs like this are pretty complicated and they demand a lot of skills from the sculptors, and maybe they demanded a little too much, because in the May 2021 issue of Hobby Japan, we get a look at the initial sculpts which were later updated to these ones here on the right hand side as Bandai's sculptors got better. There's a Japanese modeler who documented all these changes in detail, so follow the link in the description to see detailed photos of all the updates done to the different parts like the neck joint and the much nicer wings that they had later on. So if we go back to the Bastoles' wings and also the ones for the Drumlo, these never got that sculpting update, so we get none of the veins that run through the wings, and they gave up and just gave us a bumpy texture and called it a day. But still, Bandai honed their skills, and these are vastly more complicated model kits with special textures and special materials that make them better than the first Gundam series. And you may notice that the Bastole doesn't have that bumpy texture on the body like the Drumlo did, and well, it turns out Bandai unwittingly made a lot of modelers really unhappy because actually you can't sand any of those surfaces like the shoulder right here, because if you do, you're gonna have to sand off the whole thing and remove all of that texture. So it was massively annoying for more complex build because they forced you into either not sanding at all or sanding every single inch of it, which is stupid. I actually have here what's possibly a Clover-made Dunbine. I say possibly because it's not just me, but the entire internet that has yet to figure out what this thing is. It could be Clover or it could be Tomy. But anyway, this guy deserves a video all of its own. We're here to talk about Bandai today, but I just wanted to show you this thing right here because this is largely believed to be the last completed commercial product from Clover before it closed its doors. Yeah, the company closed down in the middle of Dunbine's airing. So the angry ad here, all their prayers were answered like divine retribution.
Wipe away all your tears.
After Dunbine, the next venture brought us round Vernier Vifam, which is pretty close to Xabungle in terms of obscurity outside of Japan. By this point, the concept of the real robot animation has matured and it's taken a clearer form. So the designs right here are much more coherent and you can clearly tell the good guys from the bad guys, and any modern fan would recognize the Vifam as a real robot right away. Now, I don't have any Vifam kits to show you unfortunately, but if we go back to Hobby Japan, we can see that they use springs for the pipe details on the kits this time. And these other big springs are for the legs here to make a working piston, and that's some pretty crazy stuff. Bandai also expanded the use of polycaps into their 1144 kits as well, and Hobby Japan gives us a bit of insight to this push for quality in the Vifam kits. There is this level of quality not because the mecha themselves were especially popular, but rather, the fall of 1983 saw a peak in robot models on the market. Spurred by Super Dimensional Fortress Macross, other manufacturers also started making transforming kits. This is a situation Bandai found itself in, and it was pressured into competing through better quality kits. And the Hobby Japan writer concludes that the Vifam line was ultimately a success, seeing new products nearly a year into its introduction when most of its competitors were already phased out well before that point. After Vifam, Bandai and Sunrise lands on an icon of real robots. Heavy Metal L-Gaim marks the time when not only the concept of the real robot is now clearly defined, but audiences are also aware of what it is, and there are now specific fans of the genre. The L-Gaim line's core concept was materials from real life, which is what gives rise to the intricate pistons and the shock absorbers and all the cables that you find in all the designs. But more importantly, to us modelers, materials from real life carries forwards into the kits, with the very famous 1100 L-Gaim featuring a bevy of metal parts, which is why the series has this seemingly nonsensical heavy metal moniker in the first place. Don't believe me? I have the exact kit on the cover of the ad right here. This is the Spirit Land Booster and the L-Gaim bundle, and you can also buy the Spirit Booster by itself. Inside the really tall box, what do we get? Yeah, metal parts. I mean, how cool is that for a 1144 kit? Now, to be clear, none of the 1144 robots actually have metal parts like the L-Gaim itself that came in the same box, but almost everyone did use plastic pipes of some kind, like the one used right here to connect the power launcher into the waist. And then these thin ones here in the neck, which are pretty hard to see, but we now know this was carried forward from the Dunbine kits. And then these big chunky ones running down the back of the knees. And that brings us to the impressive opened legs with a clearer look at all the hydraulics and the inner mechanical details. If we think back at Xabungle, and then Dunbine, and then Vifam, we can see the steps that led Bandai to this next level of sophistication in their models. I mean, sure, this makes the kit pretty darn difficult to put together, but actually all the model kits we saw up to this point actually required a lot of skill to put together, with glue and sanding and painting, so the L-Gaim wasn't anything unusual to any consumer of the time. And Bandai keeps trying to make L-Gaim a thing, but the models, to this day, new or old, still sell really poorly, and it remains a very niche series unfortunately. Speaking of niche, the two companies' next work is the textbook example of niche. Blue Comet SPT Layzner is a name thrown around by hardcore animation buffs to show off their street cred. They say that the animation was far better than a TV show has any right to be, and they're absolutely right. They say that the opening was far ahead of its time, where it would cut into highlights from that episode. Which Gundam Seeds' director, Mitsuo Fukuda, would copy and paste this innovative cut into his own work in Cyber Formula Saga. And fans to this day still mistakenly praise Fukuda for this ingenious invention. But maybe you've noticed that all this is about the animation, because Bandai didn't manage to be quite as innovative this time. I mean, not to say that the line is bad or anything, the smaller 1/100 kits all had this unified construction, so that you can make any combination of the torso and the limbs and the backpack and swap them around as you like. The SnapFit logo here also means that these smaller kits no longer require glue, and even though SnapFit didn't originate from this line, it was something Bandai gradually pushed into more and more of its products going into the future. The bigger 172 Layzner even has this die-cast gun, which Hobby Japan says that it's too heavy for the kit to hold up. But as you can tell, none of these really stuck around. The HGUC line has standardized 3mm holes now, and a lot of the parts are interchangeable, but it certainly wasn't directly inspired by any of these Layzner kits. I also don't have a Layzner kit to show you guys, so sorry to disappoint you. They've largely sank into obscurity among modelers, and the designs just aren't that exciting to work with, sadly. Oh, and by the way, go watch the animation, it's really insane. Basically, it's Fist of the North Star, but with robots. And we've reached the last of the Sunrise and Bandai Real Robot shows from the 80s. Metal Armor Dragonar now comes into a world where the real robot genre has matured, and maybe a little bit too much, because it was becoming a little too niche and it started alienating new viewers. So, Dragonar was specifically meant to be a reboot of Gundam for a new generation of fans. None of that happened. Now, Bandai reprints Dragonar kits more often than you might expect, just not in very high numbers, so you hardly ever see these outside of Japan. Now let's address the question that you might be having right now. Why is Dragonar 1 painted like it's going to an air show? The answer is, Bandai wanted that. Because these kits here are a showcase for the multicolor injection molding Bandai introduced a year before, which most fans know as the fancy name System Injection. Dragonar features an advanced version for the time of this technology where the piece itself can be multicolored, so the stripes on the legs are all done in plastic. On the 1/100 kit anyway. I mean, garish? Absolutely. Is it amazing? You bet for the 1980s. And we're not done yet. The bigger 1/100 kit has this, an entire inner frame years before that thing would ever be a common feature in high-end kits like MGs and RGs today. So these are the Dragonar's contribution to Bandai models as we know them today. But here I want to go back to Tomo G-san's pamphlet here because it's actually a game sheet. This page here talks about two prizes, a pimped out Chrome 1144 Dragonar 1 for 1000 lucky winners, and then a Cutter Gear robot for an even luckier 500 winners. To win, you have to play bingo. No, really. You cut off a proof of purchase from a box, and then you stick it on the bingo grid here until you make any one line for a chance to win. And the free here actually means that you can stick on any kit. It doesn't mean you can buy one less kit. It's kinda neat and evil at the same time, isn't it? And Bandai no doubt wanted to make people buy some of the less popular kits here to get a bingo. And guess what? Tomoji-san entered the drawing back then and he won! And he got the stupid cutter robot. Yeah, before I tried not to draw attention to the fact of how stupid this thing looks, and actually beyond the word Dragonar and these stripes, this thing has absolutely nothing to do with the series. Even Tomoji-san says that he actually wanted the Chrome Dragonar instead of this thing. So actually what ended up happening was 1,000 fans got rewarded with the limited model kit, and then 500 people got trolled, including Tomoji-san. But you know what? That's all 6 real robot series made by Sunrise that were funded through Bandai's model kits in the 80s, each one trying desperately to be the second coming of Gundam and none of them succeeding. But at the same time, we can experience this for ourselves in real time, all of this, with the upcoming Kyokai Senki, so you can see if you'll end up loving that and getting some of the kits. But in the 80s, each time Bandai tried, they learned something new, and we can enjoy the fruits of all those lessons when we open up any HGUC kit today. So I hope this gives you a new perspective on the time it took Bandai to accumulate all that experience and that expertise to make all the kits that we get today, because they really feel effortlessly amazing. And I hope people will be less eager to jump on every little imperfection and dismiss kits as trash or 1 out of 10 or bronze tier or whatever silly ranking system they use. And if you really want to enjoy the pamphlets at your own pace, please go pay Tomoji-san a visit and leave him a like. This video wouldn't be the same without his post to give it some structure, so you can find a link below. Thank you so much for watching. Come check us out on social media with updates on upcoming videos and sneak peeks at future projects. Links are in the description below. Or hang out here some more with one of these other videos. But before you go, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon to be notified of new videos from Hobby Clubhouse, and I'll see you next time.